Hello, everyone. I want to talk to you on this Sunday about something that a lot of students have asked me, and people in the general public as well. One of the when I don't intimidate someone because of my love for mathematics, because when people usually find out that I am a math person, that I am a mathematician, typically it creates a negative reaction in the worst case scenarios, or a kind of a silent distancing, oh, he's a mathematician kind of thing. But I wanted to talk to you today on the one of the most typical questions I get is how did you become a mathematician? In other words, what sparked your passion? At what point did you become sort of, I mean, because they say, I read your book, you say in your book you started out as a math failure in 7th grade. So how did you become the math professor you are today? How did you become the mathematician you are today? And not only that, how did you build the reputation of being such a rigorous person? Because a lot of people, they say, they got math instructors and the instructors teach them different things, but if you look at a lot of schools today, they are not precisely known for their rigorous approach. And those of you who have, I don't have any children of my own, but those of you who have children, you will know what I'm talking about. If you went to school years ago and you look at the textbooks, if they're even using textbooks, you will see in many cases that the rigor is just not there. Oftentimes, the instructor will tell them how to do things. I call it Betty Crocker math. Do you do a little recipe, you do this, do that, but there's no real understanding as to why. And me being the type of person, I was always a very curious person. I never accepted an explanation, even when I was in middle school, what they call junior high. I was never interested in the, oh, just do it because I said so. And a lot of my instructors, having gone to Christian school, a lot of my instructors had that mentality. They meant well, of course, but it wasn't enough for me. I was different in many ways. And I just couldn't take their word for it. I would often, I wouldn't say it in class, but I would often think, is it because God says it? Is it because the instructor says? I want to know why. I want to know why, for example, that when you divide two fractions, you have to multiply by their reciprocal. Why is that? And at some point, when I was in the middle of 7th grade and I was already failing, I was getting F's. And back in the day, those of you who are of a certain age, you remember there was no coddling back then. Nowadays everyone gets participation trophies. Everyone gets told that they're a wonderful person. Oh, you tried, and that's the best you can do, and you're a wonderful person. That was not the way it worked for us. If you got an F, you were considered a failure. You were considered a failure. And your teacher made it very clear in front of the whole class that you were, in fact, a failure, that you were either stupid, incompetent, something terrible, whatever it was. But they certainly weren't going to praise you. But anyway, I don't want to get into too long of a story because today's the Lord's Day and I don't want to start getting into too much work. But I did want to create this video to kind of help those students who are at that point there. If you are already in junior high or you're a high school student and you are considered or you consider yourself to be a failure, I can tell you that there's hope. There's hope. Now, I'm not going to be one of those people who sugarcoats things. You know what I'm talking about? I'm not going to say you're a wonderful person because you're trying. No. If you're failing math, you've got a problem and you need to work on that problem. And that's why I do these videos, because I'm here to help you overcome those challenges and find true joy and happiness in not in trying necessarily. I mean, trying is, of course, half the story, but also getting the answer right, getting understanding the processes and understanding why things work in the way they do. So I'm not just going to be one of those people. I'm old school. I'm not going to tell you, oh, you're a wonderful human being. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in whether you actually truly understand the math procedures precisely so that you can avoid being a failure in math, right? Because I know for a fact that if you work at it in a certain way, you're no longer going to become a failure in math. So the first, I'm going to link the three books down in the description. But the first book I'm going to tell you it's called Peter Selby's book. And the name of the book, the title of the book, when I started, if you read my biography, you will see what I talk about. But it was a very sad day in my life. I was in the Barnes and Noble, the local Barnes and Noble. I never forget, they were playing classical music in the background, and I felt hopeless. I felt so stupid that day. And I said, look, it's either going to be, in those, those of you who have a certain generation, you'll know the adults in the room used to just leave it up to you. There was no calling, nobody was going to hold your hand or anything. And I knew I was on my own. And maybe millennials or the younger generations, they probably don't understand what I'm talking about. But those of you a certain age, you know what I'm talking about. You were literally on your own. You had to solve problems yourself. So I said to myself that very day, I said, I better overcome this challenge right now. I wanted to be an A student. I was not satisfied with C's, D's, F's. So I made it a point. I challenged myself and I made it a point, an objective, to become the straight A student that I later on became. I didn't start out that way. So the first book that I discovered, and it was really by chance, I was browsing through the math. I just decided to go in the math section. It was called the math and science section. You remember back in those days, I don't know now because I haven't been in a while, but the Barnes and Noble used to have like a cafe area. So I hadn't taken coffee or anything. I hadn't had my coffee or anything. I was just browsing through the books. They were playing really nice classical music, and I found a really curious looking compact book. It was a blue color, and the title was written in white, and it was called Peter Selby's book, and the author was Peter H. Selby. The title of the book was Practical Algebra: A Self-Teaching Guide, second edition. Now, the book had been published already. I didn't know it at the time, but the book was actually not new. It had been published back in the 1970s, and I picked up a copy of the book, and it was, of course, the newer edition. And I'm going to read to you one of the reviews that I saw on Amazon. Someone wrote, "Can I get an amen? I always thought I was bad at math, and I wanted to really get it." That definitely sounds familiar to me. Nothing clicked at all from the time it was introduced in elementary school all the way through 3 years of college. It turns out math teachers are just really, and they use, I don't want to use I don't want to curse. They use it's very typical now to use cuss words. I'm not one of those people though. But anyway, math teachers are just really bad, we'll say, at teaching math, like way super pro level blip, right? I got this because of the reviews, and it's changed everything. Between this book and pre-calculus mathematics in a nutshell, I'm having so much fun. The way the material is explained makes it so easy to learn. I was always hung up on the why of everything in math. That also sounds familiar to me. In these instructions, I get the why. I cannot just blindly follow along with rules if I don't know why I'm doing something or where the operation came from. And needing depth and scope in order to succeed in this subject was making math classes miserable. No more bad teachers, no more blank textbooks. I learned more in the first 50 pages of this book than in $5,000 worth of college math classes. I'll keep taking the classes because I need them on my transcript, but I'll learn what I need from more books like this and no more Pearson or my math lab bull, you know what. Right, so this is that was a wonderful review, wasn't it? And that really resonated with me because it's exactly the moment that I picked up that book. I didn't really in the beginning have any hope, actually, because I was just kind of perusing through it. I mean, it looked somewhat familiar, but I didn't know anything about the exercise. I decided to pay. I was, of course, underage at the time, and I told my mother was with me, and I said, "Can we went to pay for it." Then I had a coffee in the cafe, and I remember the book was inside. That nice smell of the new book. It was inside a plastic bag, and I went home that day, and I was sitting. I started that same day under a fluorescent light. I had a desk lamp back then that was fluorescent. Back then, I didn't have the oil lamps that I use today, but the fluorescent one was still fairly classical. And I just started going through. I started from the beginning. There was a self-test. There was I just discovered the joy over and over and over and over and over as I went through the chapters. And finally, things were clicking because the authors made it a point to tell me why. It wasn't just do this, do that, do that. No, it was actually the no frills, no diagrams, no awful pictures. You know, in some of the new math books nowadays, they have these awful graphics all over, and they say, oh, because students are visual learners. Nonsense. You don't actually need so much fluff. They do that because they want to make you pay more in many cases for the more pages you print. Of course, the more expensive the textbook is. So I liked the book. It was very black and white, no fluff, no frills. Everything was to the point, and everything was explained step by step and the why. And so I started out with that book. I worked through it. My math just continued to improve at that point. People were amazed. My math teachers thought I was on some kind of medication or something. I wasn't. The only medication I was on was coffee. Coffee and scripture, I guess you could call that medication, but and faith. I had prayed so hard back then. I really prayed that God would help me to become a better student, to become a better person. So it was a mix of course, in my view, God's assistance, but also my own efforts. So it was a combination of things. And I worked through the book religiously. I'm talking methodically. Every day I made a point. I did one chapter a day, of course, and I would often check my answers. The book has the answers at the end of each unit. And the answers, of course, that I got wrong, I would go back and see and understand why. I started developing an obsession with math over and over and over. It started growing and growing and growing. To make a long story short, I became so obsessed with math in a good sense, and I became so good at what I was doing that I was able to graduate a year early from my high school. In fact, I told the principal, we had asked the principal if I could spend a year early, if I could graduate a year early, and the principal had no problem with it. The principal said, there is a condition though. You're going to have to take advanced courses in math. You're already in Algebra 1. Your improvement has been amazing. I took a placement test and everything just started going, improving in my life from there. I took courses in the local school, the local college, which allowed me as a high school student to take more advanced math. I took intermediate algebra the one summer so that I could, and then that allowed me. Then when I registered the next year, it allowed me to actually jump up to pre-calc in my next year of high school. So that's kind of my foundation. That's kind of my beginning. However, I was once I finished Selby's book, I was not satisfied with Selby's. I mean, that was just the foundation. That kind of got rid of all the doubts I had, all the clutter in my mind, all the double explanations, but I was ready to move on to something else. I was ready to be challenged even more because I started developing an addiction to being challenged. The next book that I have here, and hopefully you can see it on camera, I picked up this book back in the day. My school had, I don't know if they still do these things in the schools, but they had a discarded book section, and I would always check because I'm a reader, and so I like to always check and see if there were any interesting books back in the day. And a lot of my classmates, they might not have been necessarily interested in any particular book, but I was able to pick up philosophy books. For example, I started reading Hegel, which, if for those of you who are in high school, it's probably very unusual for a 16 or a 17-year-old to be interested in Hegel. I read the dialectics and all that good stuff. And although I didn't realize at the time, I knew he was German. I knew he was a German philosopher, but I had never realized at the time that almost all the bad philosophies in the world, in the Western world, actually come from Germany. No, I'm sorry, that's a fact. And if you're offended, that's because you don't know history. But and I don't mean this as an attack on German people, by the way. I mean that the German philosophers have produced a lot of things well, I'm not going to get into it now, but you know what I'm talking about. Almost all the isms that we understand have come from German philosophy. So Germany has also produced wonderful things too, right? So I'm not only going on that side of it. The first book that I noticed, though, that I was curious about, and it just happened by chance, it was this one, but I picked up. It says Book One, Modern Algebra. Modern Algebra. Can you believe that? And it says Modern Algebra, Structure and Method, and it is the revised edition, and it's by Dolciani. Although my librarian was actually an Italian American, and she corrected my pronunciation. She says, no, it's Dolciani. I said, oh, okay, I'm sorry, Dolciani. And it was so she was a professor at Hunter College in New York, and the other author here is Wooten. Um, so the last time that this was actually checked out, it's just amazing to me because I always used to read, if I knew the person. Can you imagine 19? I don't know if you could see it on screen, but 1979 to 80 by a Catherine Schnell, and she had checked out the book in 1979 to 80. This book in particular is from 1975, which those are the better editions of Dolciani's textbooks. And I am amazed. This is my one of the absolute favorite math books that I can recommend for those of you who are starting out in algebra and you are serious about it and you're not joking about it. If you really want to understand algebra the right way, I definitely recommend Dolciani's Modern Algebra. I never forgot. I picked up the book and I told my librarian. I asked her and I said, "It says Modern Algebra. What is Modern Algebra?" Because I thought, is there such thing as an old-fashioned algebra? And she said to me, "No." She investigated on the catalog, and she said, "Actually, modern algebra, it comes from there was something in the 1960s called the Math Wars." And what happened was the United States was competing against the former Soviet Union for the issue of Sputnik came out, and the mathematicians in the United States realized that the US, as usual, was totally unprepared mathematically speaking. So they started to want to teach mathematics in a rigorous way with set theory, the set of real numbers, the set of natural numbers, the way it should be taught, by the way. And so they called it modern algebra because back in the 1960s, that caused a lot of controversies among people who had a very particular way of teaching math, and they were not, sometimes old habits die hard, especially bad habits. So I'm noticing today, in a lot of schools, they're going back to, they call it back to basics. It's not basics at all. The students are failing in math. They're doing a disservice to you. It's terrible, the state of math education in this country. And that is because you're not using these kind of books, this kind of foundation. You don't have this foundation. Just to give you an example, I mean, I could share samples of it, and I'll probably do it in other videos, but just to give you an example, um, the book begins talking about in chapter 1, it starts with numbers and sets, right? And again, I don't know, it's probably blurry, but everything is explained by axioms. Everything is explained. And you notice, by the way, look at this. Look at all these pages. No pictures. Look at this. I can go on and on. There's only a few pages that have maybe like a diagram in the beginning, like this one, a wacky sort of diagram. None of the other, it's all math, pure mathematics. Look at this. I mean, this is incredible. Look at this. All theorems, right? And this was meant for high school students. So this is not for college. This is actually a high school textbook. Look at this. Look at this. Not a single page with graphics. Everything is explained with proofs. Everything. The only graphics you'll see are, of course, geometry but that's it. Look at this, right? And every page, every chapter explains to you the why behind the mathematics. So if you're really serious about becoming a mathematician and you're really serious about understanding the whys, you got to get this book. It's really hard to find, by the way. It's actually quite expensive these days. But if you cannot afford it, then maybe your local library might have a copy. Maybe they can get a used copy or something. But they are out there. The other book that was a follow-up to this was also by Dolciani and Berman and Wooten. Book two. Book two. It's a continuation. It's Modern Algebra. And it says here, and trigonometry. So this would kind of be like the Algebra 2. This would kind of be like Algebra 2 today or intermediate algebra. And it goes on. Notice once again, there's no fluff, right? It's all in here. And I've linked them down below. So look at this. Right, look at this. It's just amazing. She talks about polynomials and factoring. She talks about why the laws of exponents work in the way they do. And they clarify, if you watch my video about exponents, they actually clarify things. They say, no, you're working with a set of real numbers. They give you the definition of a power, the transitive property of equality. They talk about the associative axiom for multiplication. I mean, this is hardcore. This is no joke. And when I look at these books and I'm wondering to myself, how many people today, how many students in high school today would be able to handle these books? Again, this is not a college, this was meant for high school students. So this is not anything unusual. This was not anything unusual back in the 1960s, 70s, and even the early 80s. Those of you who went to school in the early 80s, I've met a lot of students. They tell me that this was standard stuff. Notice that they're also easy to carry, right? You don't have those big, the Cengage ones that are just. This is easy to carry. You could put this in a bag. You could take it anywhere, and it's just amazing the information it has. Book one ends with the last chapter is. Let's see what it has here. It has tables and then chapter 14. Chapter 14 is the last chapter, and it talks about, what was it here? Vectors, all right, geometry and trigonometry. But the title of the chapter, let's see what they called it. It's a long chapter, actually, but who uses mathematics? Who uses mathematics? And they start talking about um, the human equation. They mention Omar Khayyam, who was an Arab. He was probably a Muslim. Let's see, they mentioned that. It was a great honor to study with Imam. Yeah, he was a Muslim. It says Imam Muwafiq from Persia. And it was about the year 1050. So it gives you a little bit of history. And then chapter 14 is right here. Chapter 14 is called Geometry and Trigonometry. Geometry and Trigonometry. And it talks about the structure of geometry. It talks, look at all these axioms. Look at all these axioms in here. This is math. This is pure mathematics. So if you are serious about this, the books are out there. You can get them. You just got to see, if they have a good price or not. Sometimes they can be very expensive because they are expensive because they are so good. The other book that influenced me to a lesser degree, but I still use it, is called. You see it's destroyed because it's so old, and it's called. See if I can put it on the screen here. It's called Algebra, Higher Algebra, and it is. Let's see if I can show you the author here. By Webster Wells. Webster Wells. This book is from 1904, and it talks about it's similar to Dolciani's, but with older language. Basically, it uses expressions that today are not very common, like whence, right, instead of hence. But I mean, you can understand all of it. It talks about the several cases of factorization. It's a wonderful. All of the older books are wonderful resources. So, I hope this video was helpful because um, actually, my book, the monograph of algebra, was influenced by the style in here, although I'm not axiomatic in the book. I don't give you a lot of axioms because this is kind of like a pre-algebra book, and it's more like a basic study kind of. It has more exercises, and I do give you principles though in each chapter, but it's mostly to help you practice exercises. Students who have done this book, they say the exercises are actually very rigorous. Well, and I said that that's the way it should be. I had a funny story the other day because someone not associated with city tutoring, they said, "Oh, you send students to the board to do problems?" I said, "Yeah," and the student looked at me and he said, "Doesn't that embarrass the student?" I said, "That's the point, isn't it?" No, I'm just joking. But I do send people to the board because I want to make sure that people understand what they're doing, not to humiliate anyone, but just to understand that that we're all truly understanding the mathematics. So that's my story right there. That's how I started with algebra. So that was my algebraic foundation, right? There are many other books in math that I can recommend to you, but this is particularly those of you who are just starting out with algebra. You're having difficulty with algebra. Start out with Selby's book. By the way, Selby's book. There's another author, and they never mention him, but there was another author, and I always forget the who it was. Stephen Slavin. I always just say Selby, but it was actually Peter Selby and Stephen Slavin, Slavin, right? And so you could find it on Amazon. It costs right now, it's between $8.39 and $17.75, depending on whether you get it used or not. But let me see. Let me just double check the cheapest option here. Yeah, the cheapest option right now is actually $1.78. $1.78. So you can actually get it for. They have one for 577. So I definitely recommend you to start out with that. Believe me, if I did well with the book, so can you. You'll be able to do very well. Don't use a calculator, by the way. First, test out. Do mental math first, and see how that works out. Thank you for watching this video. If it was useful to you, please definitely continue to assist me with your subscriptions. I need people to subscribe so that I can continue growing and that I can continue providing the content that there's a lot of needy people out there, needy math students that are not getting the guidance, they're not getting the foundation they need. I see it all the time. There are so many young people out there that it's just a shame what is happening in our educational system. And then they get to the college level, they get to the higher levels, and they start struggling even more. Thank you for watching, and we'll be in touch soon.